Schizophrenics of Reddit, what were the first signs of your break from reality and how would you warn others for early detection? I started hearing songs on the radio and thinking I was being given secret messages by them. Any particular songs and messages? It would be interesting to know if there were any singers whose songs correlated with a certain subject. I don't want to give away too many personal details. But a lot of songs on the radio. I can't remember them all. But I'd wager at least a half dozen artists. I thought I had a special relationship with the singer of a particular band. And thought one of their albums was a roadmap for how I was supposed to behave. Each song in chronological order described various states and actions I should be taking in my life. As someone who has schizophrenia, reading all the comments on this thread made me feel about 5,000 times less alone than usual. That being said, for me, it was thinking that all my friends were plotting against me. So much so that I started digging as hard as I could to find as much dirt on everyone as possible. Auditory hallucinations followed that pretty quickly. At its worst, I began misremembering important life events. Only to find out years later that what I felt I so vividly remembered to be true was actually not. But I guess that's psychosis for you. Meds, therapy, and a fiancé and friends who have your back all work wonders though. They don't judge me when things get rough. Diagnosed schizoaffective bipolar here. Basically I have both schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. It started when I was 5 years old. I would see dead people, feel the presence of ghosts, smell rust and metals, hear voices and thoughts of other people. As a teenager I thought I was a psychic. As an adult I started a job as a psychic medium. I legit thought I could predict the future. One day I just decided I'm ducking crazy and got a psych eval. Been on medication ever since and super grounded. My major triggers are fourth wall breaking video games and TV shows. The Truman Show is also horrifying for me. I thought I was an alien descended to Earth to assist in saving humanity cause a picture fell out of a book. I thought if I held myself I could escape this realm and be back with my extraterrestrial family. The only place I belonged. In silence. It was like I could hear 1,000 different TV news broadcasts at once. I was always being followed by a dark force. I'm okay now. It started with not needing to sleep as much. Countless days of being awake. Driving endlessly to pointless destinations. Disregarding police authority. He has not been diagnosed but I firmly believe my husband is schizophrenic. I never noticed the early signs at the time but looking back he'd often get a really weird look on his face and ask if I'd heard that. I always just thought he was being silly so I'd laugh and say no. Then it began to happen with visuals too. He'd start to get really freaked out and I'd ask what was wrong and he'd say did you see that and I'd say no and he'd try and play it off like he'd been joking. Eventually he'd start having complete breaks from reality. Usually after the sun would go down. He'd act kind of off during the day and I knew what was coming that night. As for early detection it's kind of hard to say. I guess if you're hearing or seeing things you know aren't there others aren't seeing that might be a good indicator. Careful worrying too much about auditory or visual hallucinations though. You can get both of these from something as simple as really bad sleep deprivation. I've been there. And while that's also pretty unhealthy, it's not as big of a concern as other issues. Also, just like your eyes try to find faces in images, I think sometimes you can hear your voice in random noise. Not schizophrenic but bipolar which has led to psychosis. For me it started with derealization and depersonalization and escalated from there. I wasn't real and the world wasn't real led to seeing spiders all over the walls and thinking that aliens were trying to heal me and I had to heal them first. A friend was concerned and had the police do a welfare check and I tried to stab the cop with a large knife because I thought he was an alien. That shit is scary. Once they got me into the hospital and got me some treatment I did much better. I'm actually off all my meds now and doing pretty good as far as my delusions but my life is also in a much better place. There is hope. My heart hurts saying this. My mother often asks me to come to her room and if I can hear what she hears. But it's all silent. It's hard to get diagnosis and no one wants to label it : I'd say early symptoms would be hearing noises, nervous laughter out of context, and perhaps shouting back to voices that aren't around. Forgive me for putting my condescending pants on, but it appears to me from your comments that you are concerned about some of the symptoms you have been experiencing. If you are worried that you may be developing a mental disorder, please go talk to your regular doctor or a psychiatrist about what you are going through. As you say, chances are that what you have been feeling could be nothing but worst case scenario and you do have a mental disorder. Early treatment has been shown to improve outcomes and delay could make things worse. Even just talking about things can sometimes help. And your doctor, a psychiatrist, or a psychologist are trained to handle these discussions. Reddit is, for the most part, a terrible place for medical advice and full of anecdotal evidence. Situational irony of this post aside, and seeking help from a trained and licensed professional is the best advice that I can give you. If this post was made out of pure curiosity, then please forgive my unsolicited lecture. Be well. Not schizophrenic, but have gone through delusions and the like. If you ever get worked up over something, always check the facts behind it. Not opinions. Just plain fact. No facts. Don't even consider it. My cousin started by hearing voices whispering at night in bed and seeing faces in the walls. My boyfriend was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder. The first signs I believe were hearing or sensing beings in his room while he was going to sleep. The first ones I heard about as they happened was he would see something out of the corner of his eye. There is a baboon in the lab. But then when he would turn to look directly he would realize it was a student. Later there were a lot of obsessive behaviors. Burning off freckles thinking they were cancerous. Boiling a toothbrush to nothing if it fell on the counter. Making me repeat reassuring words repeatedly for hours. I eventually broke up with him, which prompted his schizophrenic break. Hundreds and hundreds of pages of emails detailing how he was going to grape and kill me. He believed he was sent from God. And me from the devil. And he had to destroy me. He left disgusting messages on my family's home phone about me. Stalked me. And later found out he made a web page about me. Good news is years later he is doing well. Though he still suffers a lot and is not happy. He has a fantastic job. Wife he adores. Great house. etc. I heard the disease described, I think by a schizophrenic on Reddit, as you are on a plane to Hawaii. And then you crash land in Siberia. And you realize that is where you live now. One of my husband's good friends was never formally diagnosed. But we're almost certain he had some form of paranoid schizophrenia. He began to be very paranoid about anything when his symptoms first started. He believed a lot of conspiracy theories. Like crazy ones about aliens invading and that a group of aliens from space were watching his every move. On one occasion, he and my husband had gone to a coffee shop together, and after about 45 minutes, the friend started to tense up and talked about how another man in the shop was a secret agent sent to spy on him. Instead of saying something like, "Nah man, everything's fine. You're overreacting," my husband grabbed his friend's hand and said, "Man, that sounds terrifying. Let's get out of here and go to another shop instead where you'll feel more safe." I tear up a little bit just thinking about it. He was a completely normal guy until his symptoms started around age 23, with the exception of having some depression and probably being an alcoholic. He was an incredibly smart guy. But last year he healed himself. He had been largely abandoned by his friends for being too weird, and he didn't have much going for him when he had to move back home with his parents. But I'll always remember how kind and compassionate my husband was to him in those last months. His parents were also not very helpful and kind of brushed off his weird mannerisms, and so they didn't try to get him help. My first indication that he had become schizophrenic were his really cryptic Facebook posts that he'd make. They just seemed a little off. Nothing that would make you scream, "Oh my gosh, I think he's schizophrenic." They were just much different to things he'd normally post. Not myself, but my best friend. She got very paranoid. She was convinced her roommate was putting cameras up in the apartment. This was in 2005, so well before they were affordable. She said people were following her and taking her things. Knowing what we do now, these were red flags. Problem was, she was always kind of dippy and the change in her behavior was so slight at first I don't think there was any way we could have known. She had her first break about 5 months later. Schizophrenia runs in my family. But I haven't been diagnosed, not that I go to the doctor, and the symptoms all stopped suddenly about half a year ago. But it started off with physical hallucinations. Small stuff like the feeling of spiders on me. But then it grew to feel like I'm covered in spiders. Then the feeling of a rope around my neck choking me. I started hearing voices whispering gibberish in my ear. These were inconvenient, but didn't really mess with my life. But one morning I woke up because I heard a beep. The first thought in my head was the ducking aliens put a device to record me and spent about an hour looking for it before I realized I was being crazy. This happened a bit for a couple of years. Then suddenly it stopped. Not sure why, but I'm glad. The first signs were grandiose beliefs in myself. Thinking I would be a revolutionary Steve Jobs type person. Thinking people on TV were giving me deep messages. Thinking the thoughts in my head were being broadcast to other people I looked at. To warn others, I would highly recommend not doing psychedelic drugs including marijuana if there is any mental illness history in your family. Started seeing faces in everything. Thought I had some special mission or purpose. When extremely sad, I would spend hours daydreaming of myself in some alternate world. Also experience missing time. When my brother starts going off the rails, he laughs. And laughs. Like doubled over and laughing for ages. Uncontrollably. At least he's having a good time. I just heard a study or something about this recently. I don't remember where. But people with schizophrenia are doing so much better with early intervention and new meds now. Essentially leading normal or near normal lives. It really did sound very promising. My mom's first signs were complete and absolute breaks from reality. No escalation that I can remember. Maybe she was just extremely good at hiding her issues. One time when I was in high school in the late zeros, she thought it was the early 90s. She didn't know where her toddlers, my sister and I, were. Didn't know where she was. She was in our family home of almost a decade. Thought she was still married to my biological father. They divorced in 1996 after years of my mother being abused by him. It was so sad. She didn't know I was me. She wasn't dangerous or violent. Just terrified and more confused than anyone else I've ever seen.